Good afternoon, good morning, good evening to all of you joining today. I'm happy to welcome you to today's webinar on water security, focusing on governance, economic development, and finance. My name is Erin Jordan. I'm the strategic programs officer at the International Water Association. And today I'll be giving a quick introduction to you, just to give you a bit of housekeeping rules about the webinar and just to get to know a bit more about our attendees. So, this webinar will be recorded and made available on demand on the IWA Connect Plus platform. It's our membership platform, as well as the IWA Network website with the presentation slides and any other relevant information from the panelists. The speakers are very much aware that they're responsible for securing the copyright permissions for any of the work that they will present today, and if they are not the legal copyright holder. IWA would like to inform you that the opinions, hypotheses, conclusions, or recommendations contained in the presentations and other materials are the sole responsibility of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect IWA's opinion. So today, as attendees, this is how you can engage with us. In the chat box, please feel free to introduce yourself, say which organization you're representing, and you can also tell us where you are coming from, but we also have that in a poll that will come up very soon. For questions directed to the speakers, please put them into the Q&A box. You should be able to find that at the bottom of your screen. And please make sure that you say the name of the speaker that you're asking the question to. We will not be responding to general questions in the Q&A box, and we also will not be able to check the chat for specific questions. So please make sure that you do that. Also, if you raise your hand, unfortunately, as you can see, you will not be able to say anything, or we cannot see you as attendees. So unfortunately, we will not be able to respond to raised hands. If you do have a question, a very pertinent question, please add it to the Q&A box. Jan, I will hand over to you.
And welcome, everyone. It's very exciting to see that we have such a broad audience from all over the world. So yeah, welcome, very welcome to this second webinar in the series on water security. My name is Jan Hofman, and I am a professor of water science and engineering at the University of Bath in the UK. And I will be here to moderate this session. So this webinar is part of a water security program that Blanca Antizar, also here in the panel, and I are organizing within IWA. And we have already organized a number of workshops on water security at the Development Congress in Kigali last year, at the World Water Congress in Toronto this year. And as said, we already have done one webinar, and this is the second webinar. And the reason we are doing this is actually to boost awareness of water security. And we focus on water security and make the link with different aspects. In our first webinar, we were talking about water security in relation to inclusivity and the Sustainable Development Goals. And today we will talk in relation to governance, economic development, and finance. And we have a great lineup of speakers today for you, which I will introduce shortly after my introductory slides. Each of the speakers will speak about 10 minutes. That gives us 30 minutes in total, and then we will have 15 minutes about for Q&A. As Aaron instructed, use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And then finally, Aaron will close with some further announcements on conferences and other webinars, I believe. So the question then is, what is water security? Where are we talking about? Well, water security is a concept which was developed already more than 10 years ago. In 2013, the UN created this pictogram on the left with the definition. And actually we are talking about ensuring access to adequate quantities of water for all purposes, for supporting livelihoods, for human well-being, for socio-economic development, but also for ecosystems. And of course, we see a lot of challenges in the world around pollution, about climate change, about the too much use of water resources. And yeah, in the end, it is a very important material we use, water. It's essential for our health and hygiene. It's essential for growing food and agriculture. And it's also essential for creating our products and processes in industry and to support them and to create energy for our living. So if we talk about the topic then of today's webinar, well, if we want to achieve water security, we have to link with what we call governance. So how are we organizing our water sectors to be able to deliver water, to supply water? What are the stakeholders involved? And in the end, will elements of integrated water resources management are important. And make transparent decisions. How can we learn from each other, and how can we organize everything in the water sector in terms of collaboration and all these structures around it. And of course, if we look at countries, governance structures are fragmented. There are many stakeholders involved. There's often lack of enforcement and compliance. And we need political will and economic development to support governance. That brings me to economic development, because water is important for economic development, for our agriculture, for industry in terms of manufacturing, for energy but also as a solvent or part of the products we deliver. And not in the last place, I think it's important that water security is also important to support the workforce to do all this, to keep people healthy and have their well-being at a high level, and create jobs for livelihoods, for productivity and competitiveness, etc. And of course, also here we see challenges water use between the different uses of water, industry, domestic use, and agriculture, and do that in a sustainable way. And then finally, if we want to do that, we need to achieve that in a financial, we need to have finance for it. And of course, many people will say, well, water is a human right. Of course, yes, that is, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to pay for the services to provide water. So all the costs and all for delivering the services need to be financed, and there are different sources of funding to create infrastructure, to create the possibilities to deliver the services. And we need to dive into these financial mechanisms. And of course, there are challenges here as well with making sure that everyone can pay for their water and mobilizing sufficient financing for the long term to be able to develop water security. And in the end, that also links back again to what I showed in the previous slide with economic development. Because if we can boost economic development, we can also help covering the costs for our water supply. So that brings me then to the panel. We have three panelists here today. We will first start with a presentation of Amgad Elmadi, who is a senior executive manager in the Green Climate Fund with over 25 years of experience in the sector. And Amgad is also the chair of the IWA, so that's the International Water Resources Association Task Force on Water Security. Secondly, also very proud to have her here is Oriana Romano. She is head of the unit of the OECD, where she is responsible for water governance, blue economy, and circular water program. And then finally, we have Noor van Doren, who is a researcher at KWR and who is our young water professional amongst us today. She will talk about the city blueprint approach for mapping urban water management, and especially focus on the governance capacity assessment in that city blueprint framework. So yeah, very proud to have all three on board today, and I would like to hand over now to Amgad to give his presentation. Amgad, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ian, and yeah, I hope I got the control here. Thank you. So I think it's a great highlight, Ian, and I wanted to start with all participants here with the question in mind, like, are we talking about finance as quantity of finance or the quality of the finance? And I will try to take this question and answer it by the end of this presentation. So why we need finance? I think like taking the climate change that we are currently live in with the increasing temperature and the new climate that has reflected in a changing in the frequency, intensity, and duration as well. And if we look at the current capacity of policies and regulations and actions that we currently do, so we're still struggling really to meet the target to reduce the temperature or to meet the target of 1.5 degree. Also, if we look at the climate change impact on the generation that being born in 2020 comparing to the generation that being born on 1960, the young generation actually facing between 3 to 7 times more in terms of the climate hazard as heat wave, crop failure, droughts, and river floods as well. But if we look at really like the SDGs, so we have 2030 SDGs, we have a clear target, we have a clear mandate. And if we look at how the world is actually been behaving to achieve this, we are really off track. So we are not really going to meet those SDGs by 2030. And we only have like 6 years up front of us. And we really need to act quickly, but we really need to have that system approach to be able to address that systemic crisis where it started by climate change that really lead to water security and the water system where you actually see 80% of the climate change impact. So it's where you can also start solutions mainly in adaptation, but also in mitigation. So, but also like what are really the key barriers here to access finance for water sector? Most of the water sector projects are really adaptation projects. So, and they really lacking access finance for several reasons. I think the first one, as Jan said it, like water is a public good and it has to be maintained as a public good. And that could be sometimes reflected as water underpricing and become very hard to monetize the value or the right value of water. But we have to maintain it as a public good and give accessibility for everyone. It also come where we look at the water service, which again, it's a very underpriced, resulting in really low cost recovery. And we have seen a multiple or several water utilities, especially in the developing countries, are really bankrupt or are not really investing in maintenance and operational as well. Water project always require, like water security project, always require a capital intensive upfront or investment upfront, and they always take a long period to pay back that investment. But also it's hard to monetize all the cool benefits of the water, and that again become the private sector make it more reluctant to come and invest. And finally, one of the key aspects as well become as a key barrier, it's actually the design of the water project, where we have seen most of the development projects are really lacking the sustainability, but also the operational and maintenance aspect in terms of the design. So how we can actually respond to all those challenges? So from the Green Climate Fund perspective, so the Green Climate Fund is the largest multilateral fund that's being established under UNFCCC to really serve the all developing countries to achieve that transition to the low emission, but also to improve the climate resilience for the society. And we really work across all sectors, and we try to drive a change by do the transformational planning by bringing that integrated planning between water and climate and other sector, catalyze the innovation by looking at the solution, transfer, technology, mobilizing finance by really scaling up the finance, leverage the finance, and also create that community of practice and lesson learned sharing as well. So how you can really access the finance from GCF? So as we are a climate fund, different from development fund, we really require for every project we fund to be really climate driven. So the problem need to be driven by climate change. So you tell me like, yeah, the impact of climate for water availability, for example. And we assess every proposal about for like 6 investment criteria: impact potential in terms of if it's a mitigation, how many ton of CO2 that will be reduced, or adaptation, how many beneficial. Paradigm shifting, the opportunity of the solutions to be innovative or to be either replicate or scalable as well. The sustainable development in terms of all the cool benefits, social, economic, environment. The recipient's need, where we look at the scale of the vulnerability, not just from the climate change, but also from the financial perspective, like debt ratio to GDP, for example, and also the country ownership, where how this project or proposal align with national adaptation plan or water policy or water plan or any national plan for the countries. And lastly, it's about efficiency and effectiveness, and that in terms of like cost benefit analysis. But cost benefit analysis here, remember, we are a climate fund, so we are not a bank. So we're really looking for the impact of our dollars rather than the return on our investment. And how much we can offer, or what type of modality or mechanism we offer our finance. So we offer our finance for national adaptation plan, for readiness program to support the countries to build their capacity, to revisit their policy. I will also have project preparation fund for concept note. Each concept note, if it's been approved, can actually access up to 1.5 million per concept note. And then we have really no cap on the project scale finance, but we have a minimum threshold, which is like 10 million. And we work across all like loans, guarantees, equity, grants, all financial instruments that we have. But we are also contributing into the knowledge development, where we actually put the water sector guide that really communicate the pathways for the paradigm shift. And that define what type of project that really target mitigation aspect in water, like smart digital water management or demand management, or even resource recovery from like biogas from wastewater or decentralized model. And then we have another pathways for like adaptation that really looking at how you mitigate drought through like ecosystem-based approach, or you look at alternative water source, or even the whole concept of integrated water resource management, water accounting, water governance, and so on. But just to give you an example where you can really sense this. So normal WASH project, for example, which again, not attract investment, it normally attract development, finance. The normal WASH project really looking at the welfare of the community. If you wanted to bring WASH project to access climate finance, where become more investable project, you really need to take the whole water cycle approach. You really need to take that climate risk technology. So you really need to look at the technology solution, the impact on the health improvement, the opportunity for agriculture, livelihood improvement, the opportunity for reducing environmental risk, the looking at the opportunity for solar or using low energy emissions, or generating really more income activity. So the whole cycle that where it can really open the door for acceptable revenue streams, where it can really attract investments. And I wanted to share with you some example, but before that, just to give you a perspective on the landscape or the ecosystem of climate finance. You will see here all the key climate funds and all the key funding resources in terms of the ticket size, how much finance they can provide against the risk they can take. And you can see the GCF or the Green Climate Fund having a high risk and high average or ticket size as well, where we can go up to 350 and even more than. And that really give us the capacity to be able really to scale and also create the market. The market could be for new technology, for new solutions, and so on. So can it happen? So that one example for in South Africa, where we've been able really to use blended finance or a co-investment platform to create a national project for wastewater reuse for 1.5 billion. And that 1.5 billion doesn't come really from us, but we've been able to address all the challenge in terms of technical assistance to take all the upfront costs. So the first component as a technical assistance facility that coming as 60 million in grants. And then we have a component where we give coordination and capacity building for all water utilities, like 60 plus water utilities in South Africa. And then we have that blended finance facility where we put our concessional money, 200 million from GCF, but those 200 million were able to attract 1.2 billion from all other financial institutions, including private sector, including asset manager, including pension funds. And that shows the power of that concessional finance. Concessional finance, what we mean here, for example, for a public entity, they actually borrow for 0.25%, 0.25%, and they can go up to 40 years payback with 10 years grace period. So when we mix all those like tenor and the time to pay back and the rates, we are able really to create that opportunity of cheap capital. And that cheap capital attract other investors to invest in water use projects. I know we run over time, but I will just finish with that as well. So another innovative financial mechanism, like all developing countries, they are in debt. And when we see like the debt swap as a mechanism where you change the bad debt to a good debt by reducing the interest rate with other new creditor, and that reduction in the rate create a volume of money that can be invested in environmental projects. So we have one example in Barbados where without GCF, that debt swap were creating an opportunity of 20 million. When GCF engage in the process using our financial capacity, our financial instruments like grant and concessional loan, we've been able to lift those 20 million up to 70 million. And that 70 million become invested in wastewater reuse project. And that shows the power of climate finance when we get that the innovative finance, including debt swap, to create or to release more money. So to summarize, GCF really supporting countries that under the Paris Agreement, all developing countries have an opportunity to access our finance. We work across all financial instruments. We have a clear sector guide that communicate those different opportunities or projects that can be really come to GCF. And our role really is to de-risk that investment and mobilize more from the private sector. And the reason for that, if we look at the international economy, public finance are declining. And most of the money are actually available in the private sector. So we try to use our capacity to mobilize more finance from the private sector. Thank you, and back to you, Jan.
Thank you very much, Amgad. Yeah, very good presentation. I think we will keep the questions for the Q&A session. So I would like to go on now to Oriana. Oriana, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jan, and very happy to contribute to this webinar from our perspective on water governance. The OECD Water Governance Program. The OECD Water Governance Program helps countries with policy advice. We have set up a network which is called the OECD Water Governance Initiative to exchange knowledge. Also, we support government at different levels in implementing policy standards, some of which I will mention in my presentation today. And of course, we try to raise the profile of water governance in the global agenda, such as in the case of COP, such as in UN conferences, including, for example, those dedicated to water and ocean, and the World Water Forum. So in the last 10 years, we have carried out a range of what we called policy dialogue to support countries with their water reforms and water governance system as a way to improve regulation, finance, as it was just mentioned, including different sources of finance and innovative economic and funding instrument, as well as capacity building and stakeholder engagement. We have also carried out thematic work when it comes to circular water economy, blue economy, urban water governance. Today, I would like to share with you three main messages. The first of which is that, of course, as we are all aware, changes in the global landscape are heavily affecting water management. We could consider a number of mega trends, such as demographic growth, urbanization, economic trends, pollution and climate change that are part of the triple climate effect, including climate change, biodiversity loss and pollution. So this type of trends have an impact in terms of water security that of course is a global issue but has important local impact. For example, by 2050, we know already that will be a 30% of increase in global water demand due to increase in the population, but also increase in the income per capita in non-OECD countries in particular. 80% will be the increase in urban water demand by 2050. At the same time, we're still facing lack of drinking water and sanitation access. 2.2 billion people lack safely managed drinking water. 3.5 billion people lack safely managed sanitation. 2.2 billion people lack basic hand washing facilities. And when we look at the urban and rural divide in terms of access to these services, we still see an important gap as 62% of people living in urban area, for example, has access to safely managed sanitation services compared to less than 50%. We're talking about 44% of access to those services in rural areas. We know also when we look at climate change that more than 90% of natural disasters are water related. They can take the form of floods and droughts, and they can expose to these risks also countries that have had usually temperate weather, such as in the north of Europe, for example. Also, 57% of the global population will be living in water-stressed areas by 2050. Urban zones are those that will be more affected by this kind of risks. First of all, because it's where most of the population lives. Actually, 70% will be urban by 2050, but also because they are very much already exposed to water stressed, and will be so in the future. 50% of the world's largest cities will face a high water stress by 2040. Here you can see a little bit the map of the exposure to water risks globally. 60% of the global population will face water issues by 2050, and from a very recent 2024 survey across 80 cities and regions in OECD and non-OECD countries, sea level rise and flood are amongst the threats that cities and regions are already facing and will be facing the most in the future, requiring response that will not be just based on the reaction, but really based on the evaluation of those risks. So the second message is that about these responses is that we have to consider that water governance is about managing complexity. What is water governance? If I would have to leave you with only 3 messages, I would say that first, we need to consider that water crises are often water governance crises. When it comes, for example, to disastrous events such as floods or droughts, these are not events that require only, for example, infrastructural type of responses, but they really require a complex evaluation, preparation, data monitoring, engagement of stakeholders for innovative solutions. And sometimes all these components are somehow missing or fragmented to be able to provide an effective response. So when we talk about water crisis, let's consider also the governance aspect, which in most of the cases is the cause itself of the water crisis. The second message is that there is no one-fit-all solutions, but that responses should need to fit places and people. So at the OECD, we focused very much on place-based policies that can provide granular responses, as one place is different than another. And then on the third is that water governance is a means to an end. Water governance is not just an end per se, but is really a way to achieve better access to safe drinking water and sanitation, to provide better responses to water disasters, and also to prevent water risks. So when it comes to the water function, we may want to consider several of them, some of which I have already considered, and of course the need to evaluate the financial need that have been so well expressed previously in the previous presentation, and the fact that there is not just one solution, for example, from public spending, but really that has to a number of innovative means should be considered, especially if we know that 22.6 trillions will be needed in terms of investment to tackle the climate crisis by 2050. So water governance is in sum the set of rules of the games and mechanisms to ensure that everyone, everywhere, at all times has access to water they need and to protect people from growing water risks. Now, when I mentioned the complexity here, you have a few examples of what we call institutional maps of a number of countries we have worked with, for example, in Brazil, in Peru, in the Netherlands, or in Korea. The thing is that there is not just one interlocutor. The governance is multi-level, should be taken into account the complexity of this institutional map and make sure that levels of government as well as agents that have decision-making power and implementation, such as, for example, a Basin Committee, are involved in the policy making of water. This led me to one of the tools that we use very much for evaluating this complexity, but also to provide countries with the needed support to improve water governance. And this tool I refer to are the principles on water governance that have been co-created within the OECD Water Governance Initiative between more than 120 members from the public, the private, the non-for-profit sectors, and of course OECD and non-OECD member countries, to really synthesize water governance in 12 principles that express the effectiveness, the efficiency, and the trust and engagement of water governance. The third message and the last one is that once we have all these clear picture about what water governance is and how we can use actually water governance to improve water security, we have to consider the need of connecting the dots. And in fact, there is no economic resilience without water resilience. This is what we have tried to prove in a recent work that links, for example, the blue economy and the water security. A number of countries depend on their economy from blue-related sectors, so whether they are dependent on oceans or rivers or lake, but they face a diversity of place-based challenges, including sea level rise, flood, and drought. So it is important in this case to not only promote a blue economy that is resilient, sustainable, inclusive, and circular, but really to make sure that the enabling environment would consider water as one, and in fact we call for the whole of a water approach that would link, for example, rivers with oceans, government at different levels, a number of stakeholders in what we call an ecosystem for blue economy players that would respond to what I mentioned earlier about the complexity of water governance. I conclude here, my time is up, and I thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Oriana, and also very interesting presentation on a very important topic for water security, how to deal with governance and how we organize our sectors. Yeah, and that's also the topic that Noor will cover. So Noor, please take the slides, and the floor is yours.
Well, hi, my name is Noor van Doren. I work as a researcher public design at KWR, and today I will be presenting about the governance capacity framework. This is a framework that we have applied in 30 cities and to 58 water-related challenges worldwide. The framework is part of the city blueprint approach, and this is a broader approach that acts as a baseline assessment for urban integrated water resource management based on accessible knowledge and a focus on reproducibility. And within this assessment, we have 3 frameworks, so they all answer slightly different questions. Within the trends and pressure framework, we aim to answer the question, what are the city's main challenges? Really focusing on the contextual setting of the city. Whereas with the city blueprint performance framework, we aim to answer the question, how adequate is the city's water management? And with this, we really focus on the performance-oriented indicators. For example, how many people actually have access to drinking water in a city? Or what is the average age of the sewers in the city? And then finally, the framework that I will highlight today is the governance capacity analysis, which aims to answer the question, where can the city's water governance be improved? For example, to address challenges related to water security. And through this, we identify governance barriers and opportunities that are faced in addressing urban water challenges. And we bundle existing scientific knowledge into an applicable assessment, forming an enabling basis for identifying effective solution pathways to overcome governance barriers. And the governance capacity framework is initially centered around 5 water challenges. These are flood risk, urban heat islands, water scarcity, wastewater treatment, and solid waste processing. And it can be applied to any other water-related challenge as well that requires collaboration and coordination among different stakeholders or multi-level governance actors. So I will quickly walk you through the different dimensions that we identify within the governance capacity framework, and also the different conditions that we then score related to these dimensions. So the first dimension is really focused on knowing which challenges you have in your city, and then also knowing which different policies can be used to address them. And of course, once you know something, you can also start thinking about what you want and what you want to do. And this is where the second dimension comes in. It is about seeing which different options you have, which ones you would find interesting, or which solutions can be helpful to address a certain challenge. And then the third dimension is focused on enabling. And this really looks into how can we make sure that the ambitions we have are translated into practice, and which effect will they have in practice. So each dimension has 3 conditions, and then again, each condition has 3 indicators. I won't discuss all indicators today because that would be a bit much. It's 27 in total, but I will walk you through the conditions, and then I will show you how they are scored. So first of all, within the knowing dimension, we have the condition awareness, and this is really about making sure that policymakers in a city know which challenges there are, which policies there are, and that there is awareness about the challenges that are there for urban water management. And then the second condition focuses on useful knowledge, and useful knowledge is related to the knowledge there is about the challenges and the effect they have on the urban water management, but also about the understanding of the data that is available. And then the third condition is continuous learning, which focuses on how the knowledge that there is used to evaluate and to learn about the challenge and how it is addressed in regards to governance. Then in the one thing dimension, we have stakeholder engagement process, which is really important to look at all the different options to address a policy or a challenge and see and make sure that all stakeholders are happy with these policies and solutions. And then the fifth condition is management ambition, and this really focuses on the different ambitions and policies that there are to address a challenge, and also making sure that they fit the local and historical, but also the normative context of the city that they are in. And then the sixth condition focuses on agents of change, and agents of change are individuals that have an intrinsic motivation to really set in motion a certain type of change. And this condition tries to look into how are these agents of change treated in a city, and how are their ideas turned into practice, or are they not really recognized? Then for the final dimension, enabling, we have as a condition multi-level network potential. So this really looks into the different relationships that there are in the water governance in the city, and if the division of responsibilities is clear. And then financial viability is also really important for the governance capacity, because there is, for the challenges that lie ahead, long-term financing is really valuable, and often now we see that financing is done on a more short-term basis. And then finally, implementing capacity is an important condition because it really looks into whether the policies that are implemented also have an effect in practice. So this is an example of the way that an indicator is scored. And what we do is we have, for each indicator, there is a set of predefined questions that can be answered, but also there is a set of predefined definitions. So by answering the predefined questions, you can try and see how the results of interviews, but also literature research, match the different definitions, and in that way justify giving a certain score to an indicator. And in this case, for example, for 4.2, protection of core values, it scores the extent to which stakeholders feel confident that their core values are not harmed in order to create a safe environment for building trust relationships. And in this case, the barriers to creating these conditions and thus resulting in a lower score for this indicator are when stakeholders feel that they have a low influence on the end result, or even if their core values are ignored. Whereas opportunities for governance capacity really come into focus when there is a maximal protection of core values. So how do we apply the governance capacity framework? We do it by first starting with a stakeholder analysis. So we really look into which actors are in play and how do they relate to each other. And based on that, we then start a literature study for each of the 27 indicators, to which we add also the insight from at least 15 in-depth interviews for each case to score and justify the scoring of these indicators. And then after the interviews, participants can also give feedback with respect to the preliminary results to see if maybe they have additional information. And based on this feedback, we then finalize the results. And I will show you some examples of what this could look like. So here I have an example of the governance capacity framework for the city of Amsterdam, in which we can see that the city of Amsterdam scores quite well when we look at governance capacity in general. So we can see that most of the indicators are scored between 0 and plus, whereas so that means that the 3 or 4 indicators that score below the 0, that can be seen more as a barrier to governance capacity, are community knowledge, information transparency, local sense of urgency, and consumer willingness to pay. So if the city of Amsterdam would like to improve their governance capacity, they could focus on these indicators first. But this is for water governance in the city of Amsterdam as a whole. Whereas when we look at, for example, flood risk, we can see that the scores are a little bit higher for some indicators. But for the governance capacity related to addressing urban heat islands, we can see that there is still room for a lot of improvement in Amsterdam. And then another city as an example is the city of Ahmedabad in India. And here we can see a bit of the opposite. So we see that in addressing water scarcity, for example, or flood risk, the governance capacity is still quite low. We see some zeros, some negatives. But when we look at the capacity to address urban heat islands, we can see that the city actually scores quite well. So this really shows that the governance capacity framework can be used to assess the governance capacity related to a lot of different topics related to water and water security. And we have applied this approach in at least 30 cities around the world. So on this map, you can see with the dots, the city blueprint approach that we have applied. And then the squares are where we also applied the governance capacity framework. And how do you apply it? What is the value of this methodology? Well, it's designed to be applicable as self-assessment. So it's largely based on existing knowledge and knowledge that you can access quite easily through interviews or, for example, even a stakeholder workshop. And it can be useful as a checklist for governance assessment to identify water management priorities to address water security. And a final note that I have that I find quite important is that this method has mainly been tested by students and young water professionals. So it really plays an important role in capacity building as well, and uplifting young water professionals to really look into the water governance of their own cities. Right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Noor. Great presentation as well, and I'm very happy to see that the city blueprint is still going around alive. We are going now to the discussion, and I would like to invite the speakers to switch on their cameras and microphones. We already have a few questions in the Q&A box. The first question I would like to answer or to ask here is for Amgad. And the question is on GCF. Can water utility providers apply for this funding? And is there a specific requirement that these funds must be applied through the government agency?
Yeah, thanks, Jan. So yes, water utility can apply through the accredited entities that already in their countries. So that's one approach. The other approach, they can actually, if they come as a private entity, they can also come directly to GCF. The other alternative also, they can come under a new process. We call it PSAA, Project Specific Assessment Approach, that also allow any entity that has a project that align with the national priorities, they can also submit that proposal for GCF as well, with the support, of course, from the NDA, as we call it, the National Designated Authority. And National Designated Authority in most of the countries, it's either Ministry of Environment or Climate Change, and in some cases, Ministry of Finance.
Okay, thank you, Amgad. Yeah, then a second question I have, which I already answered partly, which is on this chat, is from someone who is anonymous, but I would like to move that question also to Oriana. And this is a question about water management if it is going transboundary. So what can your water governance framework say about international collaboration between countries and when rivers cross boundaries, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much for the question. Well, of course, as I tried to mention, we have different levels of water governance and many layers of government that are involved in this complex system, which is even more complex when waters is shared across the countries in a transboundary basins, for example. But this is actually, I would say, more the normality than the exception, given that in any case, water cut across the boundaries and it doesn't even correspond to administrative boundary of cities. So, I mean, there is always a number of institutions to deal with. Principle 2 of the OECD water governance principles deals with these question of scales, include the transboundary cooperations, and of course there are a number of mechanisms that can be put in place to make this cooperation effective, efficient, and inclusive, because there is a lot of trust and engagement that should be done across countries. And one of the examples that we have in Europe, for example, is the Danube cooperation, which includes several countries that over the years have come across a coordination mechanism. They have defined, let's say, the rules of the game for the transboundary waters, and even though, of course, cooperation is not always easy, and it depends on the needs and also on the exposure of water to a number of risks. In that case, it is a successful example of cooperation.
Thank you very much, Oriana. Yeah, then I have a question for Noor. Well, actually, two questions. Let me start with the easy one. There's a question here: in what countries in the Middle East your GCA was applied? And my second question is actually, if you look at your governance capacity analysis, how does it relate to the work that Oriana is presenting? Are there commonalities, or are there things that overlap, and how can you actually use that to create impact in practice?
Well, for the first question, I would have to double check, but from the top of my mind, I think the governance capacity framework was applied in Israel in the Middle East, but I think, Jan, you know that as well.
I can't remember, to be honest.
Yeah. I would have to double check, but I think that was it. And as for the overlap with the work that Oriana is doing, I think especially the work that you showed on the water governance principles are really related to what we do with the city blueprint approach and governance capacity framework. So I think it's really useful to look at the outcomes of both frameworks and see how we can learn from each other, especially because the city blueprint approach is really a baseline assessment. So to get a bit more into other parts of the water governance, it could be useful to look at the OECD principles as well.
Thank you. Yeah, then there's another question here on transboundary water management, but particularly looking at transboundary aquifers and some claims that are made in, for instance, in South Africa. Amgad, can you say something about transboundary work and how that works in practice? Maybe from your experience in South Africa, do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to take it also from GSAF perspective. I think a transboundary issue, it's again, it's one of the area where we can receive projects working on it. And we try to support it through different mechanisms. So as we have a clear envelope for each country, like 10 million for each country, and that really to serve the countries to do national adaptation plan, but also to do like capacity building, programming, and knowledge management. And we try to encourage like a multi-country readiness program, especially on the transboundary issues where they can actually revisit again the governance, the reform, the policy, the plan, and so on. And aiming to use that multi-country readiness program to really encourage the country to work together and also to bring project that actually serve the whole basin as well.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, considering the time, we are at 2 p.m. Here now in the UK. I think we have to close the session. I would like to thank everyone for being here today. The recording will be available through IWA network, and there's probably also more information about upcoming webinars and events. And of course, I would like to thank all three speakers for being with us here today with their great presentations. And yeah, we had a great discussion. I think there are still a few questions in the Q&A chat, which we probably can answer also offline if we. Yeah, finally, I would like to thank IWA for hosting us today. So yeah, thank you very much. Final thing I would like to mention is that a similar webinar like this will be tomorrow. We will have one in the Spanish language, and maybe Blanca, you want to say a few words about that?
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So again, congratulations to all the speakers and thank you for all the participants today. If you understand English, but also Spanish, please come and join us tomorrow. It will be the same topic and three new different speakers, based all of them in Latin America. Also, as Jan has mentioned, we are developing a number of activities, not only webinars with the International Water Association. So please, if water security is something that worries you and keeps you awake at night, follow us on the social media to understand what we are doing and join us and reach out if you want to be part of it in a more active way. Thank you. And back to you, Jan.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. And I would actually like to close this session and hopefully see many of you back in our next webinar in a few months' time from now. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.